The maitre d' barely spared me a glance before shaking his head. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's no reservation under your name," he said, his voice polite but firm. I blinked in surprise, momentarily thrown off balance. That can't be right. I was invited to dinner with my wife's family. They should have already arrived. The maitre d' gave me a courteous smile as if my confusion were of no consequence. "I've just checked, sir. There's a reservation for 6 under Claire Bennett's name. But I'm afraid—" Before he could finish, a voice, sharp and familiar, cut through the tension in the air. "Oh, Morgan." Claire's voice rang out, dripping with amusement. "Did you really think I'd include you in tonight's dinner?" I turned, and there stood my father-in-law, his face wearing that smug, well-practiced smile I'd come to dread. Dressed in his usual perfectly tailored suit, his silver-streaked hair gleamed under the restaurant lights. Behind him, Claire sat stiffly, her gaze flickering between us, clearly uncomfortable but silent. Her brothers, James and Daniel, were sitting beside her, their heads bent in whispered conversation, occasional smirks passing between them. A cold knot twisted in my stomach, but I refused to let them see it. Not this time. "I don't understand," I said, keeping my voice level. Claire's father's smile widened, as if my confusion was some sort of joke he was privy to that I wasn't. "Oh, son," he chuckled, as if this were some small, insignificant misunderstanding. "I didn't actually think you'd show up. This is a family dinner. A place like this, well, it's just a little beyond your reach, don't you think? Maybe a more casual spot would suit you better." James snickered behind his wine glass. Daniel stared at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. Claire, she remained quiet, her hands clenched around her fork, her expression unreadable. Humiliation threatened to rise in me, thick and suffocating. The judgment in the air was so palpable it felt as if the entire room was watching us, eager to witness the spectacle. I should have expected this. Claire's father had made it clear from day one that I didn't belong. I didn't share their social status, I didn't come from wealth or privilege. My education wasn't from the schools he considered respectable, and my family didn't have the same connections his did. For years, he'd made it his mission to remind me, in subtle and not-so-subtle ways, that I wasn't good enough for his daughter. At first, it had been small, passive-aggressive comments, the way he would conveniently leave me out of family events while showering Claire with attention and gifts, the cold smiles he'd send my way when I was around. But tonight he had taken it to a new, humiliating level. He'd planned this. He had arranged for Claire's family to dine at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, ensuring that I would be left standing at the door like an outsider, excluded from the very family that was supposed to be mine. And all the while he was enjoying it, relishing the power he held over me in front of his children. I should have felt small. I should have felt defeated, consumed by the humiliation of it all. But instead, something inside me shifted. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. The kind of smile that made him falter for just a second, a crack in his confident demeanor. Then, without a word, I turned to the maitre d'. "Could you please have the owner come out and speak with me?" I asked, my voice smooth, controlled, the confidence in my tone surprising even myself. Claire's father let out a mocking laugh, clearly entertained by the suggestion. "Oh, please, do you really think the owner of this place is going to come out here just because you ask?" I turned back to him, meeting his gaze directly, no trace of doubt in my own. "Yes," I replied simply, "because the owner of this restaurant knew me very well. And in a few short moments, my dear father-in-law was about to learn a lesson he would not soon forget." Claire's father's expression froze, but the slight twitch of his jaw betrayed his frustration. Claire's smirk remained firmly in place, though I could see the subtle shift in her eyes. Perhaps even a bit of surprise, though she still didn't speak. The tension around us thickened, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone at the table. I could practically feel the cogs turning in her father's mind, trying to recalibrate after the shift in the power dynamics. For so long, I had been the one at the bottom of his hierarchy. Tonight, that had changed. And he knew it. The maitre d' hesitated, his gaze bouncing between me and Daniel, clearly unsure how to proceed. But before he could say anything, a voice broke through the moment, deep and commanding. "Morgan." I turned to see Daniel Layan, the owner of this establishment, stepping into view. He was a man in his early 50s, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his salt and pepper hair perfectly groomed. He carried himself with the effortless grace of someone who owned one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city, the kind of confidence that came from knowing his worth. I could feel Claire's father stiffen at the sight of him, his expression momentarily faltering as he registered the way Daniel looked at me, not with disdain, but with an unmistakable warmth. "Daniel," I said, my smile widening as I extended a hand. "It's been a while." Daniel's gaze flicked briefly to Claire's father and then to Claire and her brothers, before returning to me. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the history between us. It has indeed, Daniel replied smoothly. What brings you here tonight? I gestured toward the table where my in-laws were seated, their amused expressions slowly fading into something less certain. Apparently I wasn't included in the reservation, I said lightly. Seems like a bit of an oversight, don't you think? Daniel's eyes darkened just slightly as he caught the unspoken edge in my words. But then, just as quickly, his lips curled into a polite, controlled smile. That won't do at all, he said, his voice firm but pleasant. Claire's father scoffed, crossing his arms with that familiar air of condescension. Oh, please, do you really think this restaurant can just magically find a seat for him? This is a private dining establishment, not some walk-in joint. You can't just waltz in here and expect a table. Daniel's face remained calm, his expression giving away nothing. You're absolutely right, Mr. Bennett, he said with a smoothness that suggested he'd heard this kind of talk before. This restaurant doesn't accept last-minute walk-ins. I felt a brief flicker of disappointment, but before I could respond, Daniel turned toward the maitre d' with a wave of his hand. But Morgan isn't a walk-in, he's family. The impact of his words was immediate. The room seemed to fall into an uncomfortable silence. I could feel Claire's father's posture stiffen, his face draining of color. James's wine glass wobbled precariously in his hand, his eyes wide with surprise. Daniel looked from one person to the next, gauging their reactions before focusing once again on me. Claire's grip on her silverware tightened, but she still remained silent, her face an unreadable mask. Her brothers exchanged confused glances, their previous smugness gone. Claire's father, on the other hand, wasn't one to back down easily. He let out a disbelieving laugh, trying to regain control of the conversation. Family? Oh, this is rich, he sneered. You must be mistaken. Morgan is my daughter's husband, and I assure you he has no connections to— Actually, I interjected smoothly, my voice firm but unbothered. Daniel and I go way back. Claire's father narrowed his eyes, his suspicion growing. How? I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice just enough for those nearby to overhear. Before I married Claire, I worked in fine dining. And Daniel? He was my mentor. The table went dead silent. A stunned stillness settled over the group, and I could almost hear the collective intake of breath. The moment was heavy with the realization that things were not what they seemed. Claire's father opened his mouth, likely to protest, but Daniel beat him to it, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Morgan isn't just some former employee, Daniel said, his tone calm but carrying an edge of finality. He trained under me when he was fresh out of culinary school. I personally taught him everything I know about hospitality and high-end service. He was one of the best students I ever had. I could see the shock register on Claire's father's face as the truth hit him. The facade he had carefully constructed began to crumble piece by piece. For all his efforts to belittle me, I had a past he knew nothing about. A past that now stood as a testament to the fact that I was far more than he had ever assumed. A past that made his little stunt tonight seem petty and small. But I wasn't done yet. I turned to the maitre d', still standing by awkwardly at his post, waiting for direction. I assume Daniel's word is good enough to find me a seat? I asked, my voice smooth and composed. The maitre d' blinked, his mind working quickly to adjust. The question hung in the air, and I could feel the gravity of the moment settle on everyone at the table. I was no longer the outsider. The maitre d' straightened almost immediately, clearly eager to follow Daniel's lead. Of course, Mr. Morgan. I'll have the staff prepare a table for you right away. Claire's face turned a deep shade of red that I had never seen before, the kind of color one usually associates with anger and embarrassment. The shift in her expression wasn't lost on anyone. This is ridiculous, she hissed under her breath, her voice a sharp whisper. You're telling me he gets special treatment just because he used to work for you? Daniel chuckled softly, his eyes glinting with amusement. No, he gets special treatment because he earned it. As the maitre d' signaled for a waiter to set up a place for me, I noticed the staff moving quickly, and soon enough, they were preparing a seat for me, right next to Claire's daughter, Claire Jr. Oh, I said, feigning surprise as I casually glanced over at the table. Looks like there's actually plenty of room after all. Claire's fingers curled into tight fists against the tablecloth, her knuckles turning white. She was visibly seething, but I wasn't about to back down. This is absurd, she muttered, her voice barely audible but thick with resentment. I leaned in just slightly, lowering my voice enough so only she could hear. What's absurd, I said, my tone steady, is that you thought you could humiliate me and get away with it. Her nostrils flared, the tension in her face betraying the anger she was trying to hold in. You're being dramatic, I shrugged, unaffected by her response. I'm just enjoying dinner with my family. Isn't that what you wanted? Before she could snap back, Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice warm with genuine kindness. I'll have the chef send something special over for you, Morgan. Claire nearly choked on her wine. Something special? Daniel smiled, his expression a perfect blend of politeness and mischief. On the house, of course. By now, Claire was beyond furious, her face flushed with embarrassment and rage. There was nothing she could do to stop it, though, and the realization seemed to gnaw at her. Claire Jr., still silent, had her eyes fixed on her wine glass, but I could have sworn I saw a flicker of something there. Was it relief? Embarrassment? Maybe even shame? I wasn't sure, but what I did know was that this dinner had just begun. And Claire Bennett, she was going to regret ever thinking she could just dismiss me. The waiter returned with a freshly polished silver plate, carefully placing it in front of me. On it, a beautifully presented amuse-bouche. Delicate, artfully arranged, and entirely complimentary courtesy of Daniel. Claire's expression? Pure, unfiltered rage. Oh, I murmured, picking up my fork and slicing through the dish with practiced ease. This looks incredible. I savored the taste, but what I enjoyed most wasn't the dish itself. It was the deliciously thick silence that settled over the table. The tension was palpable, and I could practically feel the weight of everyone's discomfort pressing down on them. Across the table, James and Elliot exchanged wary glances, clearly unsure how to respond. Claire Jr. still hadn't said a word, but I could tell her silence was far more complex than simply not knowing what to say. She was staring at her wine glass as if it held all the answers to her inner turmoil. Claire, however, wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, setting the glass down with a little too much force. Then, with an almost imperceptible sneer, she forced a tight smile. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with mock politeness, "I suppose it's only natural that someone like you would know people in hospitality." I arched a brow, the amusement barely hidden in my gaze. Hospitality? Claire waved a hand dismissively, pretending to be casual. You know, service industries, waiting tables, kitchen work, not exactly the kind of careers we're accustomed to in this family. Ah, there it was. The real reason she had orchestrated this entire spectacle. It wasn't just about excluding me from dinner. It was about reminding me, in front of everyone, that in her eyes, I was still just a man who had worked his way up from nothing. A man who didn't belong in their world. I took another sip of wine, letting the moment hang in the air before I responded. "You say that like it's a bad thing." Her eyes flickered, annoyance flashing across her face. She had expected me to be rattled, but I wasn't. Not anymore. Not after everything that had happened tonight. "I simply meant," she continued, her voice light but thick with condescension, "that it must have been quite an adjustment for you, marrying into a family like ours." Her words were sharp, coated with the intent to belittle, but I refused to let them get to me. Claire's tone was light, almost mocking, but I saw through it. And Claire Jr.? Still silent. I turned my gaze to her, noticing the way she refused to meet my eyes. Her discomfort was palpable, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Claire's cruelty. It was about her silence. Because this wasn't the first time Claire Sr. had tried to humiliate me. It wasn't the first time Claire had tried to make me feel small. In fact, if I thought about it long enough, I could list all the occasions when she'd pulled some stunt or made some backhanded remark. There was the wedding, where she'd conveniently forgotten to invite my side of the family to the rehearsal dinner, making it feel like my relatives were invisible. Then there was Christmas, the year she gifted me a book titled Simple Recipes for the Clueless Husband in front of the entire family. A joke, of course. And last summer, the most cutting remark yet, how fortunate Claire Jr. was to have taken a chance on me. Each time I had brushed it off. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that I didn't want to cause trouble. But this was different. This wasn't a passive-aggressive jab or an uncomfortable moment. This was deliberate, a full-on attempt to humiliate me in public, and worst of all, she had let it happen. I slowly set my wine glass down, the soft clink of it touching the table marking a shift. Then, without breaking my calm composure, I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table as I looked directly at Claire. "Claire," I said evenly, "do you know what the difference is between you and me?" Her eyes flickered with a momentary curiosity. She tilted her head, but there was a hint of calculation in her expression, as if she was expecting some clever insult to follow. I smiled, the corners of my mouth turning up just enough to make her wonder what was coming next. "I worked for everything I have." The room fell silent, like a switch had been flipped. For a moment, no one seemed to know how to react. Claire's face immediately hardened. "Excuse me?" I didn't blink. "You heard me." Beside her, I felt James stiffen, likely worried that the conversation had just taken a turn he wasn't comfortable with. Elliot, sitting across the table, was tight-lipped, clearly doing his best not to laugh or, worse, agree with me. Claire scoffed, her voice sharp and defensive. "Are you trying to imply that I haven't worked for what I have?" I let the question hang in the air, letting the tension build before answering. "I didn't marry into wealth. I didn't inherit status. I built my career from the ground up." I gestured toward the table. And yet, I spread my hand, a subtle but deliberate movement that encompassed the entire setting. The white tablecloth, the crystal glasses, the perfectly arranged place settings. Here we are, sitting at the same restaurant, eating the same food, with the same level of respect from the owner. Claire's fingers clenched around her napkin. her knuckles turning white as if she were trying to hold herself together. James and Elliot, once amused, had stopped laughing. Their glances flickered nervously from one another to their mother. Claire Jr., on the other hand, hadn't said a word, but the unease in her face was enough to show that she, too, felt the weight of the moment. For the first time in years, I saw something flash across Claire's face, something that had always been well hidden beneath her mask of superiority. It wasn't anger, though, it was fear. Fear because for once, she was starting to realize something she had tried to deny for so long. I wasn't beneath her. She had spent years convincing herself that I was just some lucky man who had snuck his way into her daughter's life. But now she was seeing a different truth. The truth that I wasn't some underdog she could crush with a sneer or a condescending comment. I had worked for everything I had, and I was just as capable as anyone at this table, including her. I picked up my fork, carefully cutting into the dish in front of me, savoring the food as I let the silence stretch on. Oh, and Claire! Her eyes narrowed as she exhaled sharply, clearly furious that I had just taken full control of the conversation. What? She snapped, the mask of politeness slipping into something more brittle. I smiled slowly, taking my time to savor another bite. Then, without looking up from my plate, I said, "You should be careful about who you look down on." Claire's head snapped up, her fingers tightening on her wine glass so hard that I half expected it to shatter in her grip. I casually chewed my food, waiting for the inevitable response. "You never know who might end up above you." The table was still, frozen in a moment of pure tension. Claire, usually so poised and composed, looked anything but. Her face was stone, but her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Claire Jr. still hadn't said a word, but I could see the conflict in her face, the way she wanted to shrink into her seat. James and Elliot exchanged looks, neither one knowing whether to step in or just watch this unfold. And me? I had never felt more certain of my place in this world. I could see it now. Claire's carefully constructed world of power and control had cracked, just a little. She wasn't used to being challenged, to having someone stand up to her and defy her carefully curated image of superiority. She had built her power on people either caving in or being too afraid to speak out. But I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Not now. Not after everything she had tried to do. Claire took a slow breath, composing herself with a practiced effort. Her voice was deceptively smooth when she finally spoke again. "I see," she said, her smile tight but forced. "I suppose I should commend you, Morgan. You've managed to elevate yourself beyond your circumstances." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a dinner anymore. This was the beginning of something far bigger than any petty family drama. This was me standing my ground. This was me finally showing Claire Bennett that I wasn't a man she could dismiss so easily. Claire's face went ashen. The kind of ashen you see when someone's world, a world they've carefully constructed, is shattered in a single moment. She stared at me, mouth slightly open, as if trying to process the words that had just left my mouth. The realization of what I had said didn't just hit her, it knocked the air out of her. James and Elliot, for all their attempts at keeping their composure, exchanged wide-eyed glances. They were clearly caught off guard, but it was Claire Jr. who had me most curious. Her fingers had trembled slightly when I spoke, and her lips pressed tightly together. She wasn't saying anything, but her silence spoke volumes. She knew what I was saying was true. The money that helped fund her projects, the support that helped her climb higher, came from me. It wasn't just a financial revelation. It was the core of the power dynamic I had been quiet about for years. Claire Bennett had always treated me like I was the one who should be grateful for her daughter, that I should be content to be supported by a woman who was more successful than I could ever hope to be. But the truth was far more complicated, and I had no intention of letting her forget it. I could see her struggling with that truth, trying to reconcile her carefully crafted image of the rich, powerful family with the reality of what I had just revealed. "Claire," I said, leaning back slightly, "you've spent all this time looking down on me, but you've never once bothered to understand the relationship I have with your daughter. You think she's your little prodigy, the one who made it on her own. But I was there every step of the way. When she was starting out, unsure of herself, I was the one supporting her, not the other way around." Claire opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The smugness she'd carried for so long was gone, replaced with an emotion I wasn't used to seeing on her face: uncertainty. "You want to know something funny?" I continued, savoring the power I held in that moment. "The real difference between me and you, Claire? I don't need to pretend. I don't need to sit here and act like I'm above anyone. You built your whole identity on being wealthy and well-connected, but I built mine from nothing, and yet here I am, standing taller than you, and your daughter knows it." Claire Jr. shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had been avoiding eye contact with me since I spoke, but now I saw a flicker of something behind her eyes. Was it guilt? Maybe it was shame. Or maybe, just maybe, she was starting to understand that her mother's perception of the world had been completely skewed. I looked back at Claire. "So, go ahead. Keep telling yourself that I'm just some guy who married your daughter for her wealth. But the truth is, your daughter and I, We're a team, a partnership, and I don't need you or anyone else to tell me my worth. Claire's face was pale now. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to salvage something from the situation, but the damage was done. She finally spoke, her voice trembling ever so slightly. You're lying. I shook my head, a small, almost pitying smile curling my lips. Claire, I have nothing to prove to you. The waiter, sensing the tension, arrived at that moment, bringing another course, but no one was paying attention to the food. The room felt frozen in time, like we were all caught in the aftermath of an earthquake, everyone trying to find their footing, except for me. I leaned back in my chair, taking another sip of my wine, savoring the quiet. Believe what you want, Claire. But we both know the truth now. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. Claire sat there, her grip on the edge of the table now white-knuckled. James and Elliot had both fallen silent, unsure of how to react. And Claire Jr.? She finally met my eyes, but there was no defiance in her gaze. Instead, there was something that almost resembled respect. I wasn't sure if this was the moment where the world would shift, or if it was just the beginning of a longer battle, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was just surviving in this family. I felt like I had finally, truly found my place. And Claire? She would have to figure out how to navigate this new reality. One where I wasn't just her daughter's husband, one where I wasn't someone she could easily dismiss or belittle. The next move would be hers, but I was ready. The cool metal of the safe handle felt comforting under my fingertips as I pulled the door open, and I stepped inside the small office, my pulse steady despite the storm raging in my mind. Everything was exactly where it had always been. His things, his projects, his life. I didn't waste any time. I knew exactly what I was looking for. The document was there, right at the top, slightly yellowed but unmistakable. The contract. I pulled it out slowly as if savoring the weight of it. This wasn't just any contract. This was the key to everything. The piece of paper that held the financial bond between Adam's current success and the money he had used to climb higher in the world. It was the key to unlocking his carefully built illusion. I skimmed through the terms quickly. The language was dense, but I had enough experience to understand the implications. The agreement was clear. His highest grossing investments were made possible because of my initial funding, the money I had quietly given him when his ideas were nothing more than dreams. I smirked to myself. For years, Adam had believed he was the one in control. He thought he had built everything on his own, but the truth? The truth was that his so-called empire was built on the foundation I had provided. I folded the document carefully, then placed it into my bag. The time for patience was over. Morgan had pushed me far enough tonight, and now it was my turn to push back. I made sure everything in the office looked undisturbed before I closed the safe. I took a moment to breathe, my decision already made, but the next step had to be executed with precision. There would be no room for error. As I left the office, I moved swiftly through the house, preparing for Adam's arrival. When he walked through that door, he wouldn't know what hit him. This wasn't just about proving a point to Morgan anymore. This was about taking back control, not just of my life, but of everything Adam had ever thought he had. By the time Adam entered, I was seated at the dining table, calm and collected. I looked up from my phone as he came through the door, his tired expression the same one he always wore after his busy day. I could already see the hesitation in his eyes. He could feel the shift, the tension that hadn't been there before. Claire? He started, taking a step closer, but not yet sitting down. What's going on? I smiled, the cool, controlled expression that had been my shield for so long settling into place. Sit down, Adam, I said softly, motioning to the chair across from me. We need to talk. He hesitated, then sat, the muscles in his jaw tightening as if he already knew this conversation was about to change everything. Is this about what happened at dinner? He asked cautiously. I tilted my head. That was just the beginning. Adam shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but I didn't let him speak. I knew how he worked. He'd try to deflect, try to play the victim. But this time, I wasn't giving him the chance. I want a divorce, Adam, I said, the words slicing through the air like a razor. I watched him stiffen, his face draining of color as the weight of my words sank in. A divorce? He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, meeting his gaze without flinching. Yes, it's time for both of us to move on. He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off again. You don't get to argue with me about this. You've already made your choices, Adam. Every time you stood by and did nothing while your mother belittled me, every time you watched from the sidelines, you made your choice. And now you'll live with the consequences. I leaned forward, locking my eyes with his. You've never supported me. You've never stood up for me. So don't act surprised when I finally decide to take control of my own life. He opened and closed his mouth, clearly floundering for words, but I wasn't going to let him have the upper hand this time. And just so you know, I continued, my voice steady and sure, I've already contacted my attorney. The divorce proceedings start tomorrow. His eyes widened, a mix of panic and disbelief flashing across his face. You can't, Claire, you can't just... I held up a hand, silencing him. I'm not asking for your permission, Adam. I'm telling you what's happening. His face twisted, a mixture of confusion, hurt, and anger in his expression. What the hell is wrong with you? Why are you doing this? I sighed, standing up and walking around the table, standing just behind his chair. I placed my hand on the back of it, feeling the weight of the moment settle between us. Because, I said softly, I'm done pretending. I'm done letting you use me as your stepping stone while you get to play the hero. You never saw me as your equal, Adam, but now I'm showing you who I really am. He looked up at me, the realization slowly dawning in his eyes. It wasn't about dinner. It wasn't even about his family anymore. This was about me taking back everything he'd never let me have. I didn't need you, Adam, I whispered, my voice low but full of certainty. I've never needed you, but you sure as hell needed me. And now, you're going to learn just how much. Adam's face fell, and for the first time I saw a flicker of vulnerability in him, but it was too late. The damage had been done, and the power had already shifted. I walked out of the room, leaving him there to stew in the realization that everything he had worked so hard to build could be taken away in an instant. I had won, and this was just the beginning. I was taking everything she had built on the back of my money, everything that she thought was hers built on lies and manipulation. I could see the shift in her eyes, the subtle crack in her armor. She had always been the one in control, always the one to dictate the terms of our lives. But now I was in control. I was the one making the decisions. You can't do this, Morgan, she finally whispered, her voice barely audible as if she was trying to convince herself more than me. I gave her a small, almost pitying smile. Oh, but I can. And I already have. She took another step back, her mind clearly racing as she processed the words. It was a game changer, something she had never expected from me. I had always been the quiet one, the patient one, the one who took the insults and the humiliation without protest. But that was over now. I wasn't just walking away, I was leaving with a claim, with the proof that I had every right to take what was mine. Where are you going? She asked finally, voice shaking. To who? You think you can just leave me and walk away with all of this? I looked at her, knowing exactly what she was asking, what she was really afraid of. I'm not just walking away with everything, Claire, I said, the finality in my tone evident. I'm walking away with what you never should have had in the first place. Her eyes burned with a mix of disbelief and rage, but there was something else there too. Fear? For the first time, I saw the fear that had been lurking beneath her haughty exterior all these years. The fear that someone could outsmart her, outmaneuver her, and take it all away. The thing about people like Claire was that they spent their lives building walls, convincing themselves that they were untouchable, that their power, their control was absolute. But I had spent years learning her game, understanding how she worked, and now I was playing it better than she ever could. I turned to leave, but just as I reached the door, Claire called out, "You won't get away with this." She spat, her words full of venom. I didn't look back. I already have, I said softly, closing the door behind me. And that was it. No more games, no more lies. The world Claire had so carefully constructed for herself was about to come crashing down, and I was going to watch it all unfold from the sidelines, knowing that I had finally done what I should have done years ago. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need her validation. I was free, and nothing was going to stop me now. A month had passed since I walked out of that house for the last time, and everything in my life had shifted. It was strange how quickly things could change when you finally made the decision to free yourself. The penthouse was quiet now, the kind of peace that settled deep into your bones. No more shouting, no more tension, no more living in the shadows of someone else's control. I sat in the oversized armchair, my legs crossed comfortably beneath me, a glass of champagne resting in my hand. The soft bubbles tickled my throat as I took a sip, the taste of freedom lingering on my tongue. Across from me, my attorney slid a thick stack of papers onto the table. The weight of the document was significant, as if it held the power to close an entire chapter of my life. "It's official," she said, her voice calm but knowing as she leaned back in her chair. "You're free." I exhaled slowly, my fingers brushing over the edges of the papers. "Free," I whispered, almost to myself. The word sounded foreign and beautiful in the quiet space, a concept that had once felt so far out of reach. And yet, here I was. The divorce had been swift. Adam fought, of course. He stormed into meetings demanding better deals, threatening to take me to court. But the moment my legal team laid out the documents proving I was the true majority shareholder in his investment firm, his arrogance had shattered. All his threats, all his posturing amounted to nothing. In the end, the law and the truth were on my side. Morgan had tried to intervene. She called, her voice full of rage, accusing me of being a gold-digging opportunist. But I knew better. I didn't need to explain myself to her. I had spent enough time trying to prove my worth to people who didn't care, to people who thought I was nothing but a means to an end. So I blocked her number without hesitation. Morgan Sinclair was no longer my problem. I lifted my glass again, the champagne shimmering in the light. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to enjoy the silence, the peace that had become my new reality. It was mine to savor. I had earned it. Then, just as I was about to set the glass down, my phone buzzed. The familiar name flashed across the screen, and I felt a small smirk tug at my lips. Adam, can we talk? I paused for a moment, contemplating. Of course he would reach out now, when he had nothing left. When his empire, my empire, was crumbling, he needed me more than ever. But that was the problem, wasn't it? He had never needed me before. He had only wanted me as long as I fit into the life he imagined for himself. Now, in the wreckage of what we once were, he was reaching out for the one thing that had eluded him: control. I set my glass down, my fingers tapping against the edge of the phone as I typed out my response. Me. About what? There was a long pause before he replied. I could almost hear his hesitation through the screen. Adam, I don't know what to do. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. It was almost comical now, how he had never known what to do with me, how he had spent years taking me for granted, dismissing my needs, my emotions, my very existence. But now, when everything had crumbled, when the world he had carefully built was no longer his to control, now he wanted help. Now he wanted guidance. Now he needed me. It was pathetic, really. I typed my final message, my resolve solid as stone. Me. That's not my problem anymore. Then, without another thought, I blocked his number. It felt final in a way I hadn't realized I needed. The years of trying to be the person Adam wanted me to be, the years of holding my breath, waiting for him to step up, were behind me. I had stepped into my own light, a light he had tried to dim for so long. And now I was choosing myself. I had always been strong, but I hadn't known how powerful I truly was until I chose freedom. The champagne tasted sweeter now. Each bubble a reminder of the woman I had become. Each sip a celebration of what I had built, on my own, for myself. I was no longer defined by the past, no longer held captive by someone else's expectations or demands. The woman who had walked away from the house, the woman who had taken back control, was the woman I was now. And that woman? She was free. The power in that choice was something I had never fully understood until this very moment. There was no going back. I didn't need Adam. I didn't need anyone but myself. And for the first time, I was truly, completely free.